what faith can't do and what grace won't do. Not the same thing. They're not what grace won't do isn't the same as what faith can do or can't do. They're different. And so in Matthew 14, let me just set this up a little bit. I think we're going to probably talk about part of this tomorrow, so I'll try not to go too far down this rabbit hole. But in Matthew 14, just prior to this, the context, Jesus has heard that John the Baptist was killed. His friend and family member, his closest compatriot in faith for his entire life. His closest relative when he was young growing up, because he and John would have grown up together before even Jesus' siblings, Mary and Martha's, I guess his step siblings, Mary and Joseph's other children were born. And so his oldest companion, his closest compatriot, his precursor in the faith, his counterpart in the declaration of the end of the old covenant and the beginning of the new, to watch for him, his greatest champion of his message, his fellow prophet in the first century. And those are rare. So amazingly, his closest friend in his lifetime wasn't Lazarus, wasn't Mary and Martha, wasn't the disciples, at least not for a while. His closest compatriot in life and faith was John the Baptist. And so when he hears that John the Baptist's head has been handed over to Herod's daughter on a whim because of his pride in front of his house guests, Jesus grieves. He grieves. He cried with Mary and Martha over Lazarus because Mary and Martha were crying. They were wounded, so he was wounded. He wanted to enter into the place of their grief. He cried because they were crying, knowing beforehand, he even said that he's going to raise him from the dead and everyone's going to celebrate and God's going to be glorified and you are all going to grow in your faith. And it's good that Lazarus has passed away because it's not going to end in death, Jesus said. So he wasn't crying at the loss of Lazarus. He was crying at the sadness of Mary and Martha, which is amazing to me that he cried because we're crying even though we're wrong about what we're crying about. Can you imagine the companionship Jesus feels towards us when even when we're wrong about how we feel, he enters into how we feel and feels it with us. He's the most empathetic human who has ever lived. Amazing to me. It shows you the heart of God on our terms. But he doesn't cry because of other sadness for John the Baptist. He cries for his own. It doesn't say he weeps, but he is grieving at the earthly loss of John the Baptist. So you're not wrong to grieve. We're not wrong to grieve our loss, my friends. He grieves because of his loss. He grieves. And so he goes off. He wanders away from the crowds with the disciples, wanders off to get away from the crowds because he's sad at the news of John the Baptist's death. And yet he lands on a shore around the lake, the Sea of Galilee, and the crowds find him. And so he has compassion on them, and he chooses their need over his emotion. He chooses to engage with them in their lostness. He has compassion on them because they're sheep, like sheep without a shepherd. So he has compassion on them. You want to know what leadership looks like? It looks like this. He has compassion on the sheep because they are like sheep without a shepherd. So he cares more for them than his own need to get away and gain solace from God and from his friends at the loss of his cousin. And John the Baptist is his cousin. So anyway, he has compassion on them and he starts to teach them, and he teaches them all day long. And the evening starts to come, and the they've gathered from all of the crowds, hearing where Jesus was going to be and showing up, all the towns nearby, hearing where Jesus was going to be, and begin to form this crowd as he's teaching all day long. And supper time comes around, and they're kind of in a remote place because he was getting away from the crowds to mourn. And so because he was getting away from the crowds, they're now in the middle of nowhere. The crowds have found him in the middle of nowhere. And so if they're going to eat, they're getting hungry. The time is getting late. And of course, you know the story. He feeds the 5,000 men plus their families on the hillside because they're too far from town to be able to get something to eat expeditiously. And so you know that story. It's a separate story. Love it. He says, let's not send him away. You feed him. What do you have? And he breaks the bread and he feeds the 5,000, and they're in awe. And then again, they try to make him king. He's in the middle of grieving. He really just wants to be away from the crowd, but he cares more about the crowd than he does his own immediate need, and serves them. And it's joy to him. And it's life-giving, energy-giving to him, but he's still grieving and he still wants to get away. And now they're trying to make him king, and he knows he's going to have to be crucified and killed. And so anyway, he escapes again. He sends the disciples away from them as he's dispersing the crowd, and they see the boat leaving, and he goes up on a hillside, and they're going, okay, where's Jesus? We saw the boat go. He must have left. And then in the middle of the night, he walks out on the water. And so we're going to catch up with him now as he's walking on the water, and the disciples see him. When the disciples saw Jesus, this is beginning in verse 26, and we're going to read to verse 33. It says, when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the water, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. This is like me seeing a snake. I mean, this is crying out in a way, not the seeing a guy walking on the water. It's like seeing a snake. But I mean, they weren't going, oh no, I'm afraid. They're going, ah! They're terrified. They're terrified of this ghostly figure. We often don't see when we hear the language in Scripture because it's being translated from another language. Informal language because of the gravitas of Scripture, the translators, I think we miss, and they cried out in fear. They're terrified. How far can you get away on the other side of the boat from the ghost? They're terrified. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. Take courage. It's me. Don't be afraid. My friend, maybe this is just for you today. Whatever you're seeing, whatever you're afraid of is probably insubstantial. Probably the odds are very high that the scariest thing in your life is not real. The scariest thing in your life is not a legitimate fear. That things are not as they seem. That it is not what it looks like. That it's not going to be something that you should be afraid of. And even if what you're imagining is real, the reason you shouldn't be afraid is because God is in the middle of it. Jesus is right in the middle of it. You are not alone. Take courage. It's Christ who is with you. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Take courage. It's Jesus. He's right there with you. He's right in the middle of it. Don't be afraid. And then Peter, they're terrified, right? Their adrenaline is up. It's dark. They can't see. They're isolated. They haven't been with the Lord. They went out on their own. So Peter, love Peter, says, if it's you, I want to believe. I don't yet believe. Don't you feel like that all the time? I want it to be you. I want it to be real. I want you to be enough. I want to take courage. I want to not be afraid. So if it's you, I so identify with that. If it's you, I want it to be you. I'm not sure that it's you. I believe, but I'm not convinced. If it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come out on the water to you. Tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus in verse 29, big verse, come, he said. Come. What a command to come. Today, in the midst of your fear, in the midst of your anxiety, in the midst of your loss, in the midst of your need, in the midst of the storm, in the midst of your isolation, in the midst of your greatest issues and fears and anxieties and pressures, today, my friends, Jesus would say, it's me. Don't be afraid. I'm here. Take courage. Come to me. Come to me. Come to me. Not that you are away from him, but that you're headed towards something besides him, that your attention is somewhere else besides him, that your direction you feel like is somewhere besides him, but he's right in the middle of it. You can have courage. And he says, come to me. If you're weary, come to me. If you're afraid, come to me. If you're burdened, come to me. Over and over and over, Jesus says, come to me. And listen, when you see in scripture, Jesus saying, come to me, or things about leading and following, that doesn't mean physical separation from God. He's not saying, look at me like I've got to be looking at him like he's separate from me. He's saying, look at me because I am with you, because we are together. The theological truths of scripture aren't suddenly gone just because Christ is in you. It just changes how and where we look for him, how and where we follow him, how and where we walk with him, how and where we live our life from with him. So let's not say, oh, we can't look to Jesus because Jesus is in you. Yet then look to Christ in you. We can't come to Jesus because Jesus is in you. Yet then come to him within you. Where is your mind? Where's your heart? Where's your belief? Where's your confidence? It's not in a God that is totally other and far off. It's a God that is within me in the person and spirit of Jesus Christ. How do we follow him? Well, follow his leading from within you. You don't follow him less because you're in union. You follow him more easily, more confidently, more empoweringly, because it's Christ in you that is leading you by his spirit from within you. We don't follow him less. We follow him more because the direction, the heart, the theology, the truth of Christ is within you.